You're not part of this chapter, Helen. Stay out of our lives for his sake. That was the first message I saw the night my grandson was born. It came from Ethan's phone, but I knew instantly those words didn't come from my son. They came from her. Dana, my daughter-in-law. I had just finished folding a pale blue blanket I'd been knitting for 6 months, each stitch done in anticipation. Each row representing a silent prayer that this child would bring our family closer, would heal the little cracks that had slowly formed. But instead, before I even had a chance to hear my grandson's name, I was blocked. Blocked from my son's phone, blocked from Dana's, blocked from her mother's number. Even the landline they used for emergencies silence. That's not something a person expects, especially not from their own family. And certainly not the night they become a grandmother. If you've ever seen someone erased from their own family as if they were dangerous or disposable, I invite you to share your story. What city are you watching from? Has this happened to you? Or to someone you know? I want to hear every perspective, because I know I'm not the only one. I called the hospital as a last resort. It was late, nearly midnight, and my heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear the rings. When a nurse finally answered, her voice was kind but careful. She said the baby was healthy, Dana was recovering well, but then paused. "I've been instructed not to give out information to anyone on the restricted contact list," she said. "I'm very sorry, Ma'am. That was how I found out I'd been labeled. Like I was a threat. Like I was toxic. Like I didn't belong." I sat up all night in my living room with that baby blanket draped over my knees, reading and rereading that single message. I knew every word was hers. Dana had always wanted distance. I just never imagined she would take it this far. Not on the night her child entered the world. Not on the night my grandson entered the world. I remember the exact moment Ethan first brought her home. It was Thanksgiving 3 years ago. She was polite, pretty, and unnervingly composed. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. When she complimented my cranberry pie, I felt like I was being interviewed, not appreciated. I tried not to overthink it. Ethan seemed happy. And after everything we'd been through, that was what mattered most. Or so I told myself. Dana never let me in. At first, it was subtle. She'd correct me on little things. "Actually, Ethan prefers almond milk now, or we don't really do gifts, we do experiences." She rearranged the kitchen drawers when they visited for efficiency. She interrupted family stories to fact-check them. She never raised her voice, never acted overtly rude, but everything about her said, "You're not the authority anymore." And slowly, I started to believe her. Ethan changed too. Not all at once, but like fog creeping over a field. He stopped calling just to talk. He'd hesitate before accepting dinner invitations. He began forwarding my holiday plans to Dana for coordination. And yet I told myself, this is marriage. It's a transition. Let them figure it out. Let them be. When they announced the pregnancy, I was cautious with my excitement. I knew my place was fragile. I offered to help set up the nursery. Dana declined. I asked if I could host a baby shower. She said her sister was already handling it. I sent over a list of classic names from our family tree. She never responded. Instead, I kept my distance and kept knitting. The blanket became my conversation with the baby I hadn't met yet. Every stitch a whisper of hope. Every knot a silent plea. In the week leading up to the due date, I reached out daily, gentle texts, nothing intrusive. "Just checking in. Let me know if you need anything. Thinking of you, both praying for a safe delivery." Silence. Ethan replied, "Once we're good. We'll keep you posted." I held on to that like a lifeline. The night it happened, I didn't even get the call. I learned about my grandson's birth from the hospital's front desk after calling in desperation. They weren't supposed to tell me, but the nurse was kind enough to confirm the delivery had happened. And then came the real message, the one that ended everything. Don't try to reach us. We need space. She's not ready for visitors, and your presence would just make things worse. I stared at my phone numb. Then I called my sister. Her number had been blocked too. My cousin. Her number blocked. My neighbor down the street blocked. Dana had preemptively shut every door. It wasn't just about me. It was about erasing my presence entirely, like I didn't exist, like I never had. What kind of person does that? What kind of mother denies a grandmother her first glimpse? What kind of son allows it? I couldn't sleep that night. I wandered the house like a ghost, turning on every light, opening the baby books I had saved from Ethan's childhood, running my hands across the penciled-in heights and scribbled notes. First word, Mama. First tooth, 8 months. I had catalogued his entire childhood. I had kissed every scraped knee. I had paid every late tuition bill. And now I wasn't even allowed to know my grandson's name. The next morning, I put on my best sweater and drove to the hospital. I wasn't going to barge in. I just wanted to sit in the lobby. Maybe someone would come out. Maybe I could catch a glimpse. I waited 3 hours. Nothing. A nurse finally approached me and asked gently if I was Helen. When I nodded, she gave me a tight smile. I'm sorry, but I've been asked to notify security if you return. They've made it clear that contact is not welcome. I drove home in silence. I didn't even cry. I was too stunned, too hollow. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a sentence, a banishment. And I had no idea what I had done to deserve it. But later that evening, as I scrolled through the contacts on my phone, I noticed something strange. I couldn't even message my son's best friend, or the family friends who'd attended their wedding. I couldn't reach anyone who had any connection to Dana or Ethan. My number, my presence had been deliberately and methodically scrubbed. Not just from personal lives, from a network, from a digital space, from history. The more I tried, the more surreal it became. I was no longer just being excluded. I was being erased. I sat back in my armchair and tried to make sense of it. Was this a defense mechanism, postpartum stress? Was Dana afraid I would interfere? Or was this something deeper, something more premeditated? My phone buzzed once that night. It was a spam call. I answered, praying it was someone else, anyone else. But no, that's when it hit me. This wasn't just Dana's doing. This had my son's silence all over it. He had allowed this. He had participated in it. And that broke me more than anything else. Still, I didn't respond. I didn't retaliate. I didn't send angry messages or call mutual friends to stir up drama. I waited. I watched. And I began to observe other things, little shifts. Paperwork that didn't arrive. A medical insurance form that was missing my name. A birthday invitation that never came. A subtle redirection of all family communication to a channel I was no longer part of. At first I thought I was imagining it, but I wasn't, because 2 weeks later, I received a call from someone unexpected, a hospital administrator. She left a message saying there was an issue with the newborn's family insurance coverage. She needed to speak with someone about an authorization discrepancy. Apparently, my name had been associated with the primary dependent's secondary contact information, but had been removed. But here's the thing. I never gave them permission to remove it. And what I found in the paperwork changed everything. But the truth behind that missing authorization form, that was only the beginning. I hadn't just been locked out of a hospital room. I was being quietly erased from my own bloodline. 3 days after the hospital incident, I woke up to find the sun already high in the sky and my kitchen eerily quiet. Normally I'd be up early making toast, boiling tea, checking my calendar. But lately my calendar had been blank and my days unanchored. I wasn't sure if I was still a mother. I wasn't sure if I was a grandmother. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be anymore. There was something profoundly strange about walking through your own house and feeling like a stranger. It began with the absence of sound, not silence exactly, but a kind of muting. The absence of incoming calls, the stillness of devices that once buzzed with group texts and check-ins. The only sound I heard was the occasional chirp of the refrigerator or the wind brushing against the window panes like a reminder that the world still existed, even if I'd been excluded from it. I made myself a cup of tea. I set it on the kitchen counter. And that's when I noticed the photo frame was missing. The one that used to sit by the sugar jar, Ethan's high school graduation picture. I checked the hutch, the hallway shelf, the desk in the den. The photos had always been there, carefully arranged, framed, dusted weekly, but now they were gone. Not broken, not fallen, just gone. My first instinct was to doubt myself. Had I put them away during spring cleaning? Had I boxed them up for preservation? I searched the storage closet, nothing. Not even the box labeled Family Memories was there. I had used that box for over a decade. It was gone. And for the first time, I felt the corners of my own home begin to bend inward. I walked out to the shed in the backyard. The lock had been changed. I'd discovered that 2 nights before, but hadn't yet forced it open. That day I did. I used a crowbar I'd kept in the garage. The lock snapped with a sharp metallic crack. I stepped inside and immediately felt the musty air cling to my skin. The bins I had stacked in order photo albums, journals, heirlooms were rearranged. One bin was missing entirely. I sat down on the wooden bench and stared at the empty space. A pair of gardening gloves, clearly not mine, rested on the window ledge. The earth outside had been recently disturbed not by rain, but by feet. Someone had entered my space. Someone had taken what wasn't theirs. I closed the shed and walked back inside, trying to steady my breath. I made a list of every person who had a spare key. Ethan, Dana, that was it. No one else. Unless they'd made copies. Unless someone had given permission. That night, I called my friend Diane. We'd had standing coffee dates every other Friday for 7 years. She picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice polite but guarded. I asked if she was free to meet. She hesitated. "I thought you were taking time," she said. "Time from what?" "From everything," she answered slowly. "Dana said you'd requested some space, that you were processing things." I never said that, I told her. A pause. Then she said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to assume." When I asked if we could still meet, she said she was busy that week, and the next, and possibly the one after that. After the call, I checked my email. I couldn't find any of the messages from the book club either. I used to receive them every Tuesday like clockwork. Minutes, locations, discussion notes. They were gone. I called Susan, the organizer. "You unsubscribed, remember," she said. I didn't. "That's odd. We got a formal request from your address." "My address, your email," she clarified. "But if that's a mistake, I'll re-add you." I said thank you, hung up, and immediately checked my sent folder. Nothing. Then my trash. Still nothing. Somehow someone had accessed my email or spoofed it. Or maybe I was losing my memory. That night, I found the first sticky note. It was attached to my medicine cabinet mirror. I hadn't put it there. It read, "Take both pills tonight, but I only take 1 pill, a light calcium supplement. That's it." I tore the note off and stared at it. The handwriting was eerily similar to mine, but not quite. A subtle mimicry, like someone had copied a style from memory. I checked the rest of the house. In the drawer beneath my bed, I found a plastic pill organizer that wasn't mine, filled with small white tablets, unmarked, no label, no bottle. Just a grid of pills I'd never seen. It felt like my house was being rewritten while I was still living in it. I called Ethan again, straight to voicemail. I called his office. The receptionist told me he was on leave paternity. I asked for a message to be passed along. She said she'd try. 2 hours later, I got a text. It was from Dana's number. "Please stop contacting us. Ethan needs rest. We've made our position clear." No signature, no warmth. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I sat on the edge of my bed, turned my phone face down, and held my breath. That weekend, I went to church as I always did, but people avoided me. Some offered tight smiles, some whispered. I heard my name said softly, followed by words like unstable, fixated, and boundary issues. I left halfway through the sermon. I stopped by my neighbor Sheila's house on the walk home. We'd exchanged lemon cakes and lawnmower parts for years. I asked if she'd heard anything. I heard Dana told a few people you were having trouble coping, she said gently. Coping with what? With the transition, she said. With becoming a grandmother. I've never even seen my grandson, I whispered. She didn't respond. I sat in the kitchen that night and wrote a letter to myself. I wrote out everything I still remembered. Ethan's first word. His favorite bedtime story. The first time he held my hand after his father died. I wrote it all down to remind myself that it happened, that I had existed in his life, that I hadn't imagined the years we had together. The next morning, the notebook I'd been keeping, the one where I'd documented every strange event, was missing from my desk. I found it hours later. It had been moved, and 2 pages were torn out. I hadn't touched it. That's when I realized I needed help. I called a lawyer, not to sue, not to fight, just to understand. I explained that I suspected someone might be changing documents on my behalf without my consent. He asked for copies. I told him I had none, they'd been taken. He asked if I had reason to believe someone was trying to take legal control of any aspect of my life. I said I didn't know. He scheduled a meeting, but even before I arrived at his office, I started to see the next wave of shifts. Mail arriving late. My name spelled wrong on bank documents. An online medical portal where I'd always logged in now, claiming I needed to reset verification. When I tried to reset it, the system said my recovery phone number had changed. I called support. They confirmed that someone had updated it a week prior. Do you believe that control always comes with shouting? Or can it arrive quietly, through quiet signatures, through revoked access, through social whispers that make people disappear without a fight? If you've ever watched someone's identity slowly slip from under them without a single confrontation, tell me what you saw. Leave your story in the comments, because I can't be the only one. I sat in my car outside the lawyer's office and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked dull, not angry, not even afraid, just tired. When I went inside, I gave my name to the receptionist. She frowned. Didn't you cancel? No, I said. She checked her screen again. It says you called yesterday and asked to reschedule indefinitely. I hadn't, but someone had. I thought I was keeping track of what was being taken from me. But the truth was, someone else was already 3 steps ahead, and I hadn't even seen what they'd done yet. It had been 10 days since the birth of my grandson, and I still hadn't seen him. Not even a photograph. I used to think grief came only when you lost someone you loved. But this was different. This was mourning someone who was alive, someone who had just entered the world, and realizing you had already been written out of their story. My name was Helen, but in their world it was a blank space. I stopped counting days and started counting silences. How many unanswered calls? How many text messages read but ignored? How many people I used to hear from who now responded with vague apologies or delayed replies if they replied at all. I was starting to notice patterns. The woman at the dry cleaner who used to ask about my son now just smiled politely and changed the subject. The neighbor across the street, who always waved when walking her dog, now avoided eye contact. Even the church bulletin, which used to list my name under volunteers this week, had left it blank for the 3rd week in a row. I wasn't just being excluded from my family. I was being erased from my community. And with each new omission, I started to question, had I done something wrong? Had I offended someone? Had I spoken out of turn? I went back over every memory I had, every interaction with Dana, every conversation with Ethan, every moment that could have been misunderstood. And slowly, painfully, I began to wonder if maybe the problem really was me. That's how gaslighting works. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It doesn't break you. It unravels you thread by thread until you start pulling the yarn yourself. I tried reaching out to old friends. Most didn't answer. A few responded vaguely, said they were busy with the baby or trying to give Ethan and Dana space. One friend even said Dana mentioned you were having a hard time adjusting to being a grandmother. That sentence echoed for hours in my ears. Adjusting to being a grandmother. How does one adjust to being a grandmother when no one will even let her hold the child? I began keeping a record again, not just of what I'd lost, but of how I was being made to feel. There were days I wondered if I was imagining it all. Maybe I had misplaced those papers. Maybe I had forgotten that I'd told someone I needed time away from the book club. Maybe Dana was right. Maybe I was making things worse. And then, just as I began to consider the possibility that I had lost touch with reality, something happened that reminded me I wasn't imagining anything. It started with a voicemail from my dentist's office. They called to confirm my upcoming appointment, a procedure I'd never scheduled. I called them back confused. The receptionist said, "You called last week and asked for it." I didn't. She double-checked. "We have the call logged under your number." It was a woman. I asked for the date and time. I checked my call log. No such call ever left my phone. I went cold. That same week, I went to refill a prescription, my only medication, and was told my insurance card had been rejected. The pharmacy tech looked up my profile and said, "It looks like you were removed from the policy last Monday." I hadn't removed myself, and I hadn't received any notice. When I called the insurance provider, they said the primary policyholder had signed a change of coverage form. The signature matched Ethan's. When I asked for a copy, they said they could only send it to the current policyholder, not me. It was in that moment that I realized I was no longer just excluded. I was vulnerable. When you're no longer connected to your family by legal paperwork, when your access to healthcare, to emergency contact, to financial security begins to disappear, one silent form at a time, you realize you're not just being kept out of their lives, you're being deleted from your own. I looked around my house and saw only shadows of what used to be mine. The photos were still gone. The blanket I'd made for Jasper untouched. I opened the kitchen drawer where I kept the emergency contacts list, only to find it was missing. The folder that had Ethan's birth certificate, my will, my medical records, all gone. A few papers had been left in their place, but they were empty envelopes, the kind people reuse to make you think the contents are still inside. I called the police. Not to report a crime, I didn't even know what to call it. I asked if there was any way to track who had been in my house. The officer who answered sounded confused. "Do you have a restraining order?" he asked. "No." "Has anything been stolen?" "Not exactly," I said, "but everything is different." He sighed. "Without signs of forced entry or confirmed theft, there's not much we can do." I hung up, and for the first time in years, I cried in the middle of the afternoon. I cried, not because of what was gone, but because of what I was starting to become, a woman no one believed, not even herself. Have you ever been made to question your own memories? Have you ever been so slowly pushed out of someone's life that you began to doubt whether you had ever truly belonged in the first place? If this has happened to you or to someone you love, I want you to write about it in the comments. Tell me what it felt like, because I need to know I'm not the only one who's lived through this kind of silence. The worst part wasn't the erasure, it was the rewriting. I began to hear secondhand that people were talking. Dana was telling others that I had become unstable, that I'd struggled with paranoia for years, that Ethan was trying to protect the baby from intergenerational trauma, that I'd made scenes, broken boundaries, sent aggressive messages. None of that was true, but the people she told didn't know that, because I had no voice in their lives anymore. My calls didn't go through. My emails bounced back. My invitation to the christening, if there was one, never came. One night, I couldn't sleep. I walked down to the den and sat on the floor with a photo album I'd managed to save from the attic. I flipped through pages of Ethan's childhood, his first birthday, his third-grade art show, his high school graduation. I remembered every moment, every emotion, every word he used to say to me, how he'd whisper, "You're the best mom ever," after I tucked him in. And now he wouldn't even return my calls. How does a child go from needing you to forgetting you? The answer is, they don't do it alone. Someone helps them. Someone whispers lies into quiet moments. Someone shifts their perspective, one small correction at a time. Someone edits the past until the only version of it that remains is the one they control. I wasn't losing Ethan by accident. Dana was pruning me out like a gardener trims an invasive branch, and Ethan had let her. Still, I clung to the idea that there had to be a line she wouldn't cross, a limit to how far she'd go, a place where even she would say, "This is enough." But I was wrong, because what happened next proved that I wasn't just being excluded, I was being replaced. I thought silence was the end of the story. But I hadn't realized yet Dana was preparing to take something far bigger than my voice. She was after my identity. The day I realized I could no longer trust my own memory began with a letter. A thick envelope slid through the mail slot early that morning, cream-colored and heavy. There was no return address, no stamp. It had been hand-delivered. I opened it slowly, half expecting another hospital bill or a community newsletter. But what I found instead was a neatly typed document, a petition. At the top, it read, "Notification of intent to establish durable power of attorney." My name was listed as the subject. Dana's name was listed as the proposed attorney-in-fact, and Ethan's name appeared at the bottom alongside a space for his signature. There was no signature yet, but everything else had already been filled out. My full legal name, my address, a checkbox indicating mental incapacity as the justification for the power transfer. I stood at the kitchen counter stunned. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a move, a strategic, premeditated move to take legal control over my life. I had never signed anything. I had never been diagnosed with anything. I had never even had a cognitive evaluation. And yet, here it was, paperwork suggesting that I was no longer capable of making my own decisions. Dana hadn't just been painting me as unstable in whispers. She was preparing to codify it into law. I folded the letter back into its envelope and called the lawyer I'd spoken to a week prior. His assistant answered. She said he was in court, but could see me later that day. By the time I arrived at his office, I had the letter in my bag, the bag clutched tightly to my chest, like a shield. I sat across from his desk and told him everything about the shed, the missing documents, the altered insurance forms, the phantom appointments, the social isolation. He listened carefully, occasionally jotting notes. Then he read the letter. "This wasn't filed yet," he said, "but it was prepared. That means someone's building a case or wants it to look like one's already been built." He asked if I had ever undergone a psychological evaluation. I told him no. He asked if I had any history of mental illness. I shook my head. "Then if anyone claims otherwise," he said slowly, "they'll need proof." I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe I could stop whatever this was before it went any further. I left his office with a checklist. He told me to collect every document I could, any record email witness statement, anything that showed a pattern of manipulation. But as I began gathering evidence, I ran into another wall. My bank account had a hold on it. When I went in to ask why, the teller looked confused. "You requested a freeze due to fraud suspicion," she said. "I didn't," I replied. She checked again. "The request came from your online profile. I hadn't logged in for a week." She lifted the hold, but I left the bank shaking. This wasn't just identity manipulation. It was identity theft in real time. That evening, I called the hospital where Jasper had been born. I asked if I was listed anywhere on the birth documentation. The woman on the phone checked and said no. Only the parents, she said. No grandparents listed. I asked if anyone had specifically requested that. She said, "It's not unusual." But in this case, the mother was very clear. No extended family contact, no disclosures, no visits. That same day, I received a voicemail from my former colleague at the school district. She sounded hesitant. "Hi, Helen. I'm just calling to ask about the letter you sent us." We were surprised by the tone. "You've always been so measured. I hadn't sent a letter. I asked her to forward it." When I received the scanned copy, my name was typed at the bottom, but the content was unrecognizable. Rambling, paranoid, disjointed. It spoke of being watched plots and betrayal. It sounded like a cry for help or a trap. Dana wasn't just working to remove me from the present. She was fabricating a past in which I had already fallen apart. And Ethan, he hadn't returned a single call. Not one. I decided to confront him directly. I drove to their house at dusk. The curtains were drawn. The lights were on. I rang the doorbell. No answer. I rang again. After 5 minutes, the door opened. It wasn't Dana. It wasn't Ethan. It was a woman I didn't recognize. Middle-aged, kind face, professional demeanor. "Hi," she said. "Can I help you?" "I'm Helen. This is my son's house." She looked confused. "I'm the nanny," she said slowly. Dana didn't say anyone was coming. "I'm Ethan's mother." I said, my voice steady but shaking underneath. She hesitated. "I think you should speak to them directly." "I've tried," I said. She looked behind her, then stepped outside and gently closed the door behind her. "I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered. "But you need to know something's not right." I held my breath. "She told me you moved to Arizona," she continued, "that you were in assisted living." I blinked. "What?" "She said you had early onset cognitive decline, that you'd signed over everything, that Ethan doesn't talk about it much." "He says it's complicated." I swallowed. "Do I look like I'm in assisted living?" She looked uncomfortable. "No, you don't." I handed her my number. She took it hesitantly, said she had to go and disappeared back inside. I drove home shaking. She had lied about my location, my health, my presence, to the very people who lived under her roof. Dana was rewriting me into non-existence, and she was almost finished. Have you ever had someone craft an alternate version of your life, one where you don't even recognize yourself? A version they present to others as fact, while you're still living and breathing and screaming into a void that no one hears. If this has happened to you or someone you love, please leave a comment. I need to know I'm not alone in this. Because what I'm experiencing doesn't just feel cruel, it feels surgical. 2 days later, I was walking back from the grocery store when a man approached me on the sidewalk. "Ms. Langley," he asked. "Yes." He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside, an official notification of competency review scheduled for the following week, requested by Ethan and Dana. I sat on the curb, envelope in hand, as cars drove by and the world moved on. I read the document twice. It was real. Signed, notarized, processed. I was to appear before a court-appointed examiner to determine if I was mentally sound enough to manage my own affairs. That was the moment I stopped feeling confused. I stopped feeling broken. And for the first time in weeks, I started making a plan. I didn't sleep the night the court summons arrived. I sat by the window watching the streetlight flicker against the leaves, replaying every step that had brought me here. The woman in the mirror barely resembled who I had been just a few months ago. There were lines around my mouth I hadn't noticed before. My shoulders had curled forward like I was bracing for an impact that never ended. My hands, the ones that had written birthday cards, braided Ethan's hair as a boy folded endless loads of laundry, trembled slightly. Not with fear anymore, but with something deeper. Resolve. I needed to find out how far Dana had gone. I needed to gather evidence not just for court, not just for my lawyer, but for myself. I needed to see the blueprint of the trap I had been living in. I started with something simple, my email. I created a brand new account, one no one else knew about, and used it to contact people who hadn't responded in months. I sent quiet, neutral messages. Thinking of you, just checking in. Hope you're well. Most didn't reply, but a few did. One woman from church said, "So glad to hear you're okay. I heard you'd been hospitalized." Another neighbor replied, "We were told you'd moved out of state, that the house had been sold. That lie again, Arizona. An assisted living facility, an invented diagnosis." I documented every message. I went to the hospital next. Meredith, the administrator who had helped me weeks earlier, recognized me instantly. I asked if she could check the visitor log from the day Jasper was born. She hesitated. "I'm not technically supposed to," she said, "but I remember something strange." She pulled up the file and pointed to the access notes. There was a temporary alert on the file, a restriction placed by someone claiming to be the patient's mother. "But that's not you." "No," I said. "It's not." She glanced around, lowered her voice. "They said you were mentally unstable, that you'd shown up before and made threats. We had no reason to question it at the time." I nodded. "Did anyone witness that? Did I ever show up?" She shook her head. "Not a single visit." She printed the record. I folded it carefully and placed it in a folder I had begun keeping beneath a loose floorboard in my hallway closet. Next, I returned to the pharmacy. I asked the technician for a record of all prescriptions under my name for the last 3 months. She printed it out. There, listed among my known medications, were 2 prescriptions I had never taken, one for a low-dose antipsychotic, the other for an anti-anxiety drug I had no history with. Both filled twice. Both listed as authorized by family physician. I requested the full logs. I received a document with a digital signature I didn't recognize. The same doctor I had used for 20 years, but a prescription I'd never asked for. I added the printout to the folder. Then I dug deeper. I went to the county clerk's office and requested copies of any legal filings that mentioned my name in the past 6 months. There was a temporary guardianship hearing scheduled 2 weeks out, filed under mental deterioration. I hadn't been notified. I asked to see the original submission. It was sealed. But the clerk, a young man named Marcus, leaned in and said quietly, "You didn't hear this from me, but your daughter-in-law's name is listed as the petitioner. Your son's is listed as a supporting witness." I stood very still. What address did she use for me? He checked the screen. A facility in Tempe, Arizona. I almost laughed. She had fabricated an entire life for me, down to a false address in another state. A legal identity that didn't exist to support a mental breakdown I hadn't had. I left the building and sat on a bench near the parking lot. I watched pigeons pecking at the cracks in the concrete and thought, how many lives can be stolen like this quietly with just the right forms? I returned home and called Sheila, my neighbor. I asked if she remembered seeing any unfamiliar cars parked in my driveway over the past month. She paused, then said, "Actually, yes. A black SUV, unmarked. It came by twice." A woman got out with a clipboard. I thought it was one of those home health inspections. It wasn't. I checked my mailbox again. This time I looked underneath. Taped to the bottom of the slot was a tiny recorder, battery-operated, voice-activated. I had never seen it before. I played it. It captured mostly silence mail being dropped in Windbirds. Then one faint conversation, likely from my living room. A woman's voice too muffled to identify clearly saying she's barely functioning. "It's not safe anymore." And a man's voice replying, "I just don't want her to get hurt." I froze. It was Ethan. He had stood in my home maybe while I was asleep or out and said those words. I added the device to my folder. Have you ever felt like someone was building a case against you while you were still breathing, still speaking, still living your life, like everything was normal? Have you ever sensed that people you trusted weren't just watching you fall, they were planning it? If you've seen this happen in your family, your neighborhood, your community, I hope you'll share it. Leave a comment, even if it's hard. Because silence is what people like Dana count on. The folder grew. It now contained hospital visitation logs, pharmacy prescription records, insurance alteration forms, a hidden audio recording, testimonies from church members, screenshots of false emails, legal documents from the court, and still I needed more. One night, I walked to Dana and Ethan's house. I didn't approach. I stood across the street beneath a tree, watching the lights flicker in the kitchen. Through the window, I saw Dana on the phone, laughing, holding the baby. Ethan walked in and kissed her forehead. I didn't hate them, not even then. I pitied them, because whatever power they thought they had, it was built on deception. And I had stopped being afraid. I turned to leave, but a voice called out softly from behind the side gate. It was the nanny. She whispered I made a copy of something, just in case. I didn't know what it meant at first. She handed me a folded piece of paper. I opened it under the street lamp. It was a screenshot of a group chat between Dana and two of her friends. It read, "She's too stubborn to break on her own. But once the state steps in, Ethan will sign whatever I put in front of him." The date was from a month before Jasper was born. I looked at her. "Why are you giving this to me?" She shrugged. "Because I have a mother too." I added the screenshot to the folder. And that night, for the first time in weeks, I slept. Not because I felt safe, but because I finally had a starting point. What I didn't know then was that the next phase wasn't about me gathering proof. It was about her making her final move, and what she had in mind would make everything so far look like a rehearsal. I was never supposed to marry a man like Ethan Langley. That's not something I say with regret, it's just the truth. He came from quiet money and old traditions, the kind of family that kept photo albums of church barbecues and believed in Sunday casseroles and annual Christmas letters. I came from a different world, one with locked cabinets and unpaid bills, and a mother who spent more time screaming than speaking. When I met Ethan, I thought he was soft. Not in a weak way, in a kind way. A man who said thank you to waiters, who read actual books, who looked people in the eye when he spoke. He saw me, not just the exterior I'd built to protect myself, but the woman I was trying to become. And for a long time I let myself believe that I could step into his world without it ever noticing that I didn't belong. But of course his mother noticed. She didn't say it directly. Helen was far too careful for that. She smiled. She complimented my dress. She offered tea. But behind every word was a question. Behind every gesture, a quiet disapproval. She corrected my stories in front of his cousins. She rearranged my son's nursery after I'd decorated it. She inserted herself into every detail of our lives, as if her presence were a moral obligation, a kind of maternal tax I had no choice but to pay. After the wedding, it got worse. She insisted on being involved in our financial decisions, on reviewing the home insurance documents, just in case on calling Ethan to suggest how to manage our utility bills. She baked cookies every Sunday and left them on our porch, as if that sugar could cover the bitterness she carried. She believed in guiding us, but really she meant controlling. At first I tried to set boundaries. I suggested fewer visits. I asked Ethan to stop forwarding our private calendar to her. But he resisted. "She's just trying to help," he said. "She doesn't mean anything by it. That's what people like Helen do best. They mean nothing by it." That's the camouflage. Because if they screamed or slammed doors, it would be obvious. But no, Helen wielded her power in sighs and suggestions, in rewritten memories and guilt. So I started making plans, small ones at first. Ethan didn't need to know everything. I suggested we change our phone plans, consolidate under one account. That way I could filter certain numbers. I told him it was for convenience to save money. He agreed. Then when the baby came, I made sure the hospital had clear instructions, no visitors, without written approval. I used her own tools against her gentle suggestions, reasonable concerns. Ethan's mum has been struggling, I said to the intake nurse. It's been stressful for her. We want to avoid drama. No one questioned me. Why would they? I was a new mother. Exhausted, honest. After Jasper was born, Helen began her usual campaign calls, texts, little gifts. I knew they were meant as peace offerings, but by then I had stopped mistaking her passivity for peace. She didn't want to be involved. She wanted to be in charge. I blocked her, not out of malice, out of necessity. You can only protect your child from so many generational traumas before realizing that sometimes the threat isn't in the past, it's still present, wrapped in polite smiles and expectations. Ethan didn't fight me. He didn't want to. Deep down, he knew. He had spent his life navigating her moods, her stories, her carefully disguised guilt. The part of him that still longed for her approval began to shrink the moment he held Jasper. I saw it in his eyes, the clarity of knowing you would never let someone else do to your child what had been done to you. So yes, I made decisions. I restructured the insurance. I updated our legal documents. I consulted with lawyers. I researched power of attorney, not because I thought Helen was dangerous, but because I knew she would never stop unless we made it official. Unless we gave the world paperwork to match what we already knew to be true, she would say we erased her, that we excluded her. But the truth is, Helen never saw herself as a participant, only as a director. And the second we stopped reading from her script, she decided we were betraying the story. I know how that sounds. I know what people will think, that I'm cold, that I'm manipulative, that I've stolen a child from his grandmother. But let me ask you this. How many women have been told they're overreacting when they try to set boundaries with their husband's family? How many mothers are gaslit into silence in the name of tradition? I didn't want to destroy Helen. I wanted to protect my son. And I won't apologize for that, because I know women like her. I was raised by one. My own mother taught me how influence hides in suggestion, how love can be used as currency, how silence can be louder than rage. But I also know how the world judges daughters-in-law. We're always too much, too loud, too distant, too modern, too possessive. Never just enough. Never simply human. That's why I planned carefully. That's why I didn't scream. That's why I gathered evidence, witnesses, support, documentation. So when the time came when Helen finally forced the confrontation, I wouldn't have to explain myself. I would have the truth in my hands, and Ethan would stand beside me not because I demanded it, but because he'd seen it too. The way she undermined my choices, the way she weaponized nostalgia, the way she tried to rewrite our life as an extension of hers. Some people will say I went too far. So let me ask you directly, do you believe past wounds give someone the right to shape another generation in their image? Or does protection sometimes look like distance, even if it hurts? If you've ever been caught between preserving your family and protecting your child from a cycle you refuse to repeat, share your story in the comments. I know I'm not the only one. I've prepared for every possibility. If Helen sues, we're ready. If she tries to win Ethan back, she'll find the door closed. If she brings in lawyers or threats or tears, we'll show them the documents. But what I didn't expect, what caught me off guard, was that she might fight back differently. Because last night, when I checked our front door camera footage, I saw her standing across the street. She wasn't crying. She wasn't pleading. She was watching. And when she turned and walked away, she looked calm. Too calm. I don't know what she's planning. But I do know this. If Helen tries to take back what we've already secured, I'll end it before she ever gets the chance. I wasn't expecting anyone that morning. The sun had barely climbed over the treetops when I heard the knock. Not the doorbell, a knock. 3 sharp raps, like someone wanted to make sure I knew it wasn't a delivery. I walked to the front window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see the figure standing on my porch. It was a woman, maybe late 40s. She was holding a manila folder worn at the corners, like it had been handled too many times. She stood still, not fidgeting, not shifting her weight, just waiting. Her calm unnerved me more than anything. I opened the door cautiously. "Ms. Langley," she asked. "Yes, my name is Carla Dunn. I used to work at Clearwater Registry. I was the notary who processed your last will revision 2 years ago." I froze. I remembered her vaguely, a quiet, professional woman who had come to the house when I was updating my beneficiary allocations. She had worn a navy blazer and had smiled politely when I offered her tea. "I shouldn't be here," she said. "I know that. But something came across my desk last week, and I couldn't stop thinking about it." She handed me the folder. Inside was a photocopy of a notarized statement, my name at the top, a block of dense legal text in the middle, and a signature at the bottom that was supposed to be mine. Except it wasn't. "I thought you should know," Carla continued. "This came in through an attorney's office. They're trying to establish a new durable power of attorney. The original document was modified, but when I saw the signature, I knew it didn't match what you signed 2 years ago. And the reason code listed was questionable." I looked down at the justification line. In typewritten font, it read, "Subject lacks judgment due to persistent delusions." Delusions? I looked up at her. "You're saying this is forged?" She hesitated. "I can't say that officially, but I've notarized thousands of signatures, and that's not yours. I compared it with your file." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, voice low. "Because something about this isn't right. Because I've met you. And because if I were in your place, I'd want someone to speak up." I invited her inside. We sat at the kitchen table. I showed her the folder I'd been building, the medical records, the insurance changes, the witness statements, the hospital log, the screenshot from the nanny. She read in silence, her lips pressed tightly together. "This isn't just a family dispute," she said. "They're laying legal groundwork. If this goes unchallenged, they'll have enough paper trail to claim you're incapable of managing your own affairs." "I know," I said. "I don't think your son understands how far this could go," she added. "I've seen cases like this. Families get locked out of their own homes. Estates get transferred. Judges rubber stamp guardianship if they think no one's contesting it." That was when I told her something I hadn't told anyone, not even my lawyer. "I have one thing left," I said. "Something Dana doesn't know exists." Carla looked up. My husband had written a codicil before he passed, a sealed one. He had it filed through our family attorney and never told anyone what was in it, not even me. But 2 days before he died, he handed me a copy and said, "Only use this if you ever need to remind people who this house belongs to." "And where is it?" she asked. I walked to the hallway closet and pulled down the false panel I'd had installed behind the coats. Inside, taped in a waterproof sleeve, was the original codicil notarized, dated, and sealed. We opened it together. It clearly stated that in the event of any dispute over the home's ownership or living arrangements, I retained full control of the property until my death, regardless of future POAs, trust amendments, or family objections. The clause was triggered only if I was living in the home alone and deemed legally competent. Carla whistled softly. "They didn't know about this." "No," I said. "They didn't. This changes everything." I called my lawyer and had him review the document. He confirmed its legitimacy and immediately filed a notice of intent to contest the guardianship petition based on withheld information and probable forgery. For the first time in weeks, I felt the air shift. I wasn't just defending myself now. I was on the offensive. The next day, I went to the post office to send certified copies of the codicil and my folder of evidence to 3 trusted people: my lawyer, my cousin in Oregon, and an old friend from college who worked in local media. Just in case. When I returned, I found a letter taped to my front door. It wasn't signed. It simply read, "We know what you're doing. You won't win." I folded the letter carefully and added it to the file. Later that week, Carla called again. "There's something else," she said. She had gone back into the document archive and found something odd 2 notarization requests filed under my name, dated 6 months apart, both for the same medical directive form, but with different text. One of them is legit, she said. The other wasn't filed with your original attorney. It came from a firm known for representing elder estate disputes. She sent me the document. In the falsified version, I had supposedly relinquished my rights to make end-of-life decisions. It handed full authority to Dana. I didn't sign this, I told Carla. I know, she said. And yet, it had already been used to remove me from Ethan's emergency contact list, a quiet administrative shift no one had ever informed me of. That night, I sat at the table with everything laid out in front of me, pages and pages of paperwork, screenshots, affidavits. But one thing still nagged at me. Ethan! His silence, his absence, his willingness to believe her version of me. Was it cowardice, or was it something worse belief? If you've ever watched someone you love choose the easier lie over the painful truth, you know the particular ache of that betrayal. It isn't loud. It's not explosive. It's quiet, lingering, like a shadow that follows you into every room. If you've gone through that, if someone you raised or loved turned away from you because it was simpler to believe you were broken, I hope you'll share your story in the comments. I need to know I'm not the only one who's lived this, because the thing is I hadn't even begun to fight back yet. Everything so far had been documentation, preparation, quiet resistance. But now I had a third party, a witness, a legal ally. And that changed the stakes. I called Carla one last time and thanked her. She paused, then said, "There's one more thing you should know." What? I overheard a conversation last year, when I was leaving Dana and Ethan's house after the will meeting. Dana was speaking to someone on the phone in the driveway. She said, "She won't see it coming. Not until the door locks from the outside." That phrase stayed with me all night, not until the door locks from the outside. And for the first time I realized the lock might already be turning. I chose the family brunch on purpose. It was Dana's idea, an early summer Sunday, a catered garden meal at her parents' estate to introduce Jasper to the extended family. I wasn't officially invited. No one said my name. But I found out anyway. A cousin let it slip. Then a neighbor mentioned seeing the tables being set. Dana had chosen white linens and pastel florals. There would be quiche and champagne, a violinist from the local conservatory. The baby was 6 weeks old. I arrived 5 minutes before noon. The security guard at the gate looked surprised to see me. I gave him my name. His screen blinked red. "You're not on the guest list," he said. I handed him a sheet of paper, a printed version of the codicil my husband had sealed before his death, the one giving me full rights to any family gathering on property, paid in whole or in part by our estate trust. The guard stepped back, uncertain, then waved me through. The moment I stepped onto the lawn, conversation dipped. The breeze carried the clink of silverware and the rustle of silk dresses. I walked slowly, deliberately toward the long white table at the center. Ethan sat at the head, holding Jasper. Dana stood to his right, beaming. Her parents flanked them, glasses raised. Toasts had just begun. When Dana saw me, her smile faltered. She placed her flute on the table with the same grace she used to press pressure into someone's throat without ever leaving a mark. Ethan stood slowly adjusting Jasper in his arms, his lips parting like he might speak. But no words came. "I won't stay long," I said, "but I need to say something." The chatter died completely. Forks lowered. Aunts turned their heads. Dana took a step forward. "This isn't the time, Helen," she said evenly. "No," I replied. "It's the only time." I reached into my bag and took out a folder, cream leather, zipped along the sides. From it, I withdrew a small stack of documents clipped neatly. I placed them on the table directly in front of Dana. "I have here a notarized statement," I said, showing a forged signature filed under my name to transfer power of attorney. The original was processed through an elder estate firm that has a history of misrepresentation. I placed another document beside it, This is a medical directive. I never signed one that removes me from decision-making rights. It was used to change my insurance records and erase me as an emergency contact without my knowledge. I added a hospital log. This log shows I was placed on a restricted list during Jasper's birth, labeled unstable, despite never visiting the hospital once. Gasps rippled across the table. Ethan's face drained of color. Dana reached for the stack, flipping through pages with trembling fingers. I continued. I also have a screenshot, a message Dana sent 2 months before Jasper's birth. She said, quote, "Once the state steps in, Ethan will sign whatever I put in front of him." Dana looked up sharply. "That's not what I meant. Then we'll let others decide," I said. "I've filed everything with an attorney." This folder was delivered in triplicate, one to the court, one to the press, one to my lawyer. "I didn't come here to make a scene. I came to give you a choice." I paused. "Tell the truth in front of your family, or continue lying and let it unfold in public." Dana's mother stood. "This is inappropriate," she snapped. "You're unwell." I turned to her. "Then let the documents speak for themselves." Ethan hadn't moved. He still held Jasper, but his arms were limp. He looked down at his son, then at me, then at Dana. He opened his mouth, closed it again. His eyes shimmered with something between shame and disbelief. Dana gathered the papers and shoved them back into the folder. "This is harassment," she said. "You're unstable, Helen. You've always been." "I have a certified forensic handwriting expert," I said calmly. "She's ready to testify." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, from the far end of the table, a voice spoke. "I was there," said the nanny. Everyone turned. "I was in the kitchen the day Dana recorded the video of Helen's supposed confusion. It was staged." Dana asked Helen a series of questions out of context, then clipped the recording. I saw her do it. I was going to stay quiet. But I can't. Dana's face turned crimson. "You have no idea what you're talking about." But the room was shifting. People leaned forward. Someone whispered. Dana's father looked down at his plate. Ethan placed Jasper gently into his bassinet and stepped away from the table. He didn't speak, but he didn't stop me. I turned to everyone. "You don't have to like me. You don't have to understand me. But you should know this. I raised Ethan alone. I paid for this house. I cared for this family. And when I was pushed out, I didn't scream. I didn't slander. I documented. I stayed quiet. Until now." I turned to Dana one last time. "You can fix this. Or you can fight it. But you can't keep pretending no one sees." For a moment there was silence. Then someone at the table, Ethan's cousin, I think, said quietly, "Let her speak." Dana sat down, and no one stopped me again. Have you ever watched a family fracture not from one event, but from a slow burn of silence and manipulation? Have you ever seen truth finally surface, not with fury, but with undeniable clarity? If you've lived this, if you've seen someone rise from being erased to being undeniable, share your voice in the comments. I want this story to echo beyond just me. I left the brunch as quietly as I came. I didn't take back the folder. I didn't need to. What I didn't expect was that the following morning, I'd get a call from an unknown number, and the voice on the other end would change everything I thought I knew about the law. "Ms. Langley," the man said, "I'm the attorney representing Dana. I believe there's something you haven't seen, and it's about to become public." The voice on the phone was steady, professional, and unfamiliar. "Ms. Langley, this is Mark Tilden. I represent Dana Langley. I believe there's a document you haven't seen yet, one that's about to be filed in King County Superior Court tomorrow morning." I stayed silent. He continued. "Dana intends to pursue a restraining order based on a claim of elder instability, alleging harassment, public defamation, and psychological endangerment to her child." I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then I said, And what do you expect me to do with this information, Mr. Tilden? He cleared his throat. Frankly, ma'am, I'm not calling on Dana's behalf. I'm calling on behalf of my conscience. I've reviewed both sides' materials, and there's something here that doesn't sit right. That got my attention. Go on. Earlier this week, Dana submitted an amended petition, a retroactive competency affidavit, filed under Washington State's Vulnerable Adult Protection Act. She's trying to argue that you pose a danger not only to yourself, but to the integrity of your son's family and estate. But when I reviewed the handwriting, the timestamps, and the submission path, I found something that raised a red flag, which is the notary seal was fabricated. I stood up without realizing it. My fingers tightened around the phone. The notary doesn't exist, he continued. The seal number doesn't match any credentialed professional in the state of Washington. The form was digitally backdated. In plain English, someone submitted a fake affidavit to the court. And you're still representing her? I asked. Not for long, he said, but before I step away, I wanted to give you something, a courtesy, because you'll want to act before this gets buried. He emailed me the document, a scanned copy of the fraudulent affidavit Dana had intended to use. I forwarded it to my attorney immediately. Within 2 hours, we were sitting in his office filing a motion for emergency hearing under RCW 74.34, the section of Washington state law that protects elders from coercive legal manipulation, a statute rarely used in domestic family disputes, but tailor-made for this case. At the hearing, the next day, the courtroom was cool and hushed. The judge was a woman in her 60s, sharp-eyed no-nonsense. Dana sat at one table flanked by a junior associate from the law firm that had absorbed Mark Tilden's withdrawal. Ethan sat beside her, pale expression, unreadable. My lawyer rose and presented our file-forged documents, altered medical records, proof of digital tampering, and sworn testimony from Carla the notary, who appeared via Zoom to confirm that her seal had been faked and her credentials misused. Dana didn't speak. Her attorney tried to claim a misunderstanding that a third party had mishandled the paperwork, but the judge wasn't buying it. She looked over her glasses and said, "Ms. Langley, do you know that submitting falsified legal documents under the name of a credentialed state officer constitutes felony forgery under RCW 4016.0030? Dana's lips parted. Her voice cracked when she said, I trusted someone else to handle it. The judge raised a hand. If you continue, I'll need to place you under oath. My attorney stood. Your Honor, in addition to the forged affidavit, we're submitting formal request under the Uniform Trust Code Section 604 to freeze all modifications made to Ms. Langley's legal estate after January 3rd of this year. We also request that the court recognize our client as mentally competent and in full control of her affairs, with all accusations of instability dismissed as retaliatory and malicious in nature. The judge looked at Dana. Do you wish to contest? Her attorney murmured something. Dana stared down at the table. Her jaw clenched. Her silence was her answer. I didn't smile. I didn't even breathe deeply, because I knew this wasn't over. This was just the undoing of the damage, not justice. Not yet. After the hearing, as we left the courtroom, Ethan followed me outside. He didn't speak for several steps. Then finally, quietly, he said, I didn't know. I swear. I didn't know she'd done all of that. I didn't look at him. I didn't have to. But you suspected I said, and you chose not to ask. He didn't argue. He just nodded. What now, he asked. You tell me, I replied. Have you ever had to face someone who didn't hurt you directly, but stood by and let it happen, who let someone else destroy your name, your rights, your peace? Because it was easier to stay silent. If you've lived through that kind of passive betrayal, the kind that hides behind love and indecision, tell me in the comments. I want to know how you found your way through it, because even now I don't know if I've forgiven him, or if I ever should. That night, I went home and sat in my living room, the house finally quiet, in a way that didn't feel hostile. My hands rested in my lap. The folder, no longer my only shield, sat on the coffee table. My lawyer had advised me to let things cool down, but I wasn't finished, because one document still hadn't been filed. My husband's sealed codicil, the one that didn't just protect the house, but gave me full executor rights over his trust, rights I had never exercised, until now. I picked up the pen and signed the authorization to activate the codicil. Tomorrow, I wouldn't just take back my name. I'd take back the house, the title, and every inch of ground she thought she'd claimed. The morning I reclaimed the house was quiet, almost too quiet for what it represented. There was no trumpet sound, no grand announcement. Just a manila envelope on the porch addressed to Dana and Ethan, signed by the county clerk, certifying the legal activation of my late husband's codicil. With that single stroke, every amendment Dana had orchestrated was overridden. Every whispered claim of instability, every forged revision, every locked gate undone. I didn't send a message. I didn't need to. The silence from their end was confirmation enough. They didn't fight it. They didn't respond. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a stranger in my own home. I felt still. The locks were changed, the passwords reset, my legal rights restored. But more than that, my sense of self, long buried beneath paperwork and whispered rumors, had reassembled piece by piece in the quiet strength of not needing to scream to be heard. That week, I opened a window I hadn't touched in years. I let the breeze in. I brewed coffee just for me. I sat on the back porch and listened to birdsong without flinching at the sound of a phone notification. No one could change my schedule anymore. No one could claim to speak for me. The world hadn't stopped spinning, but for once it spun in a rhythm I recognized. 3 days later, Ethan came alone. He stood on the front porch holding a box. No baby, no Dana. I found this in the attic, he said when I opened the door. I think it's yours? Inside were the photos, the baby shoes, my husband's old cufflinks, the birthday cards. Everything Dana had stashed away when she'd begun reshaping the household in her image. Ethan didn't ask to come in. He just stood there, box in hands, and said quietly, I don't know what to say. So I said it for him. You let it happen. He nodded. I know. She tried to erase me. I let her. I stepped back slightly, not out of malice, but out of instinct. There are some truths that don't heal quickly. Some silences that can't be filled by apologies. I'm sorry, he said. But I didn't reply. I took the box and closed the door. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called the local bakery and ordered 6 dozen pastries. Then I phoned the church hall and booked the Saturday brunch slot. I printed invitations with my own hands, no graphic designer, no email blast, just cardstock and ink. I titled the event Helen Langley's Reintroduction. That Saturday, I stood at the front of the fellowship hall, wearing my late husband's favourite brooch and a long blue skirt I hadn't had occasion to wear since Ethan's wedding. The room filled slowly, not just with friends, but with people I hadn't expected. Susan from the book club, Diane from the reading circle, Sheila from next door. Even the pharmacist who'd once quietly questioned my prescriptions came by with a bouquet. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. Their presence was the apology. At noon, I took the microphone and said simply, I'm Helen Langley, and I never left. The room applauded. Not out of pity, out of recognition. In the weeks that followed, I planted a new garden in the front yard. I joined a writers' group and started telling parts of my story carefully at first, then more openly. I wasn't looking for vengeance. I was rebuilding the narrative. My narrative. I didn't need to control anyone else's story anymore. I just needed to be the author of mine. One morning, as I sipped coffee on my porch, a young woman walked by and paused at the gate. "Are you the lady from the article?" she asked. I didn't know which article she meant. Several had run quietly about legal guardianship abuse. I had given one interview anonymously. "I might be," I said. She nodded. "You gave me the courage to call my grandmother. We hadn't spoken in 2 years." Then she walked away. I sat with that for a long time. Because sometimes reclaiming your place doesn't just restore your voice, it amplifies others. Have you ever watched someone go from being dismissed and disrespected to being fully seen, not because they fought louder, but because they stood firmer? If you've lived through something like this, or know someone who has, I hope you'll share your story in the comments. You never know who's reading and who needs to know they're not alone. I never got the moment I dreamed of the baby asleep on my shoulder, the family photo in front of the fireplace, the smile of being called grandma for the first time. But I got something else, something rarer. I got my life back, not as it was, but as I chose to live it. And if you want to hear more stories like this raw, real, and true, subscribe to this channel. There are so many voices out there waiting to be heard, and this time no one will silence them, not ever again.